The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of the Grand Manor Hotel as Maya adjusted her black uniform one last time in the employee mirror. She had been working at this fancy place for almost 6 months now, and today was going to be one of their biggest events of the year. The Whitmore wedding was the talk of the entire staff for weeks. Everyone knew this wasn't just any ordinary wedding. This was the kind of event that cost more money than most people made in several years. Maya took a deep breath and walked through the service doors into the main ballroom. The sight still took her breath away every single time. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, each one probably worth more than her car. The tables were covered in pure white linens that looked like they had never been touched by human hands. Fresh roses in every shade of pink and white filled enormous vases, their sweet scent mixing with the smell of expensive perfume that seemed to float in the air. She wasn't the only server working today. Of course, there were at least 20 other people rushing around, making sure every single detail was perfect. The head chef had been yelling at everyone since 5 in the morning, and the wedding coordinator looked like she might have a nervous breakdown at any moment. Maya had learned to stay quiet and do her job well. In a place like this, the help was supposed to be invisible. The guests started arriving around noon for the ceremony, and Maya watched them through the service windows as she folded napkins. These weren't regular people like the ones from her neighborhood. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than Maya's rent for 3 months, and the men looked like they had stepped out of magazine advertisements. Their shoes alone probably cost more than what Maya made in a week. Maya had grown up in a small apartment across town with her mom and younger brother. Money was always tight, and fancy events like this felt like watching life from another planet. But she needed this job. Her mom had been sick for the past 2 years, and the medical bills kept piling up. Every dollar Maya made went toward keeping their little family afloat. The ceremony took place in the hotel's garden area, and Maya could hear bits and pieces of it through the windows as she set up the reception area. The bride looked like a princess from a fairy tale, with a dress that had so many layers it looked like it could float away. The groom stood waiting at the altar in a suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be custom made. After the ceremony ended, the real work began. 200 guests started flowing into the ballroom, and Mia and the other servers had to make sure everyone felt like royalty. She moved between the tables with practiced grace, filling water glasses and making sure the bread plates were always full. The conversations around her were about vacations to places she had only seen in movies, business deals worth millions of dollars, and charity events that raised more money in one night than her family had ever seen. Maya had developed a skill over the months of working here. She could listen to conversations without looking like she was paying attention. It wasn't that she was nosy, but sometimes the stories were just so different from her own life that she couldn't help but be fascinated. Tonight she heard about someone's new yacht, another person's art collection, and a woman complaining that her personal chef had quit without notice. The bride and groom moved through the crowd like movie stars, greeting everyone with huge smiles. The bride's dress made a soft whooshing sound every time she turned, and her jewelry caught the light from the chandeliers in a way that made everything sparkle. Maya found herself wondering what it would feel like to be the center of attention. Like that, to have everything in your life be so perfect and beautiful. As the evening went on, Maya noticed how effortlessly these people moved through their world of luxury. They never had to think about whether they could afford something. Never had to choose between paying for medicine or groceries, never had to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Their biggest worry seemed to be whether the champagne was cold enough or if the flowers matched their outfit perfectly. The wedding coordinator had hired a famous pianist for the evening, someone who usually played with the city symphony. Maya could see him at the grand piano in the corner, his fingers dancing across the keys like he was born to play. The music floated through the room, adding to the magical atmosphere that money could create. Maya continued her work, refilling champagne glasses and clearing away plates from the first course. She had learned to move quietly and efficiently, never drawing attention to herself. In a world like this, the staff were meant to be part of the background, like the flowers or the fancy wallpaper, noticed only if something went wrong. She couldn't help but think about her own life as she worked. 3 years ago, things had been so different. She had been accepted to one of the best music schools in the country with a full scholarship. Piano had been her life since she was 7 years old, when her grandmother had found an old keyboard at a garage sale and brought it home. Maya had taught herself to play by watching videos online and practicing for hours every day, but then her mom got sick and everything changed. Someone had to take care of the family, someone had to work to pay the bills, and Maya was the oldest. She had given up her dreams without really thinking about it because family came first. That's just how she was raised. Now, as she watched the wealthy guests enjoying their perfect evening, Maya sometimes wondered what her life might have been. Like if things had been different. But she pushed those thoughts away quickly. There was no point in thinking about what might have been when there was so much work to do right now. The laughter and conversation grew louder as the night went on and the champagne flowed freely. Maya found herself smiling at some of the stories she overheard, even though she knew she was living in a completely different world from these people. They were kind enough to her when they noticed her at all, saying please and thank you, but she could tell that in their minds. She was just part of the scenery. Little did anyone in that beautiful ballroom know that before the night was over, the invisible waitress moving quietly between their tables would become the most talked about person at the entire wedding. But for now, Maya just focused on doing her job, well, making sure every glass stayed full and every plate was cleared away quickly while the pianist's beautiful music filled the air around them all. The evening was going perfectly, just like something out of a fairy tale. Maya had been watching the pianist from the corner of her eye as she worked. His name was Mr. Harrison, and she had heard the wedding coordinator mention that he usually played with some of the most famous orchestras in the country. His fingers moved across the piano keys like magic, creating music that seemed to float through the entire ballroom. Maya was clearing plates from table 12 when she noticed Mr. Harrison pause for just a moment. She thought maybe he was just taking a breath between songs, but something about the way he stopped seemed different. His hand went to his chest, and even from across the room, Maya could see that his face had gone pale. The beautiful melody of the wedding waltz suddenly cut off in the middle of a phrase. The silence hit the room like a wall. All the gentle conversation and clinking of glasses seemed to stop at exactly the same moment. Maya looked up from the plates she was stacking and saw Mr. Harrison swaying slightly on the piano bench. Then it happened. The distinguished pianist, who had been playing so beautifully just seconds before, suddenly collapsed. His body fell forward and his arms hit the piano keys, creating a harsh, jarring sound that was nothing like the gentle music he had been making. Several guests at the nearby tables jumped up from their chairs and someone screamed. Maya dropped the plates she was holding. They crashed to the floor, but nobody even noticed the sound because everyone was focused on what was happening at the piano. Mr. Harrison was lying motionless on the floor beside the piano bench, and his face was a scary shade of gray. The bride, Isabella, was standing near the dance floor when it happened. Maya watched as all the color drained from her face. This was supposed to be the most perfect night of her entire life, and now something terrible was happening right in front of everyone. The beautiful white dress that had made her look like a princess suddenly seemed to make her look small and helpless. Isabella's new husband, Robert, rushed over to her and put his arms around her shoulders. Maya could see that he was trying to stay calm for his wife, but his eyes were wide with shock. All around the ballroom, the wedding guests were standing up from their tables, craning their necks to see what was going on. Someone yelled for everyone to step back and give the man some space. Maya recognized the voice as belonging to Dr. Peterson, one of the wedding guests who had been sitting at table 3. She had served him dinner earlier and remembered thinking how kind he seemed when he thanked her. Now he was kneeling beside Mr. Harrison, checking for a pulse and doing the things that doctors do in emergencies. Maya stood frozen in place, still holding a water pitcher in her hands. She had never seen anything like this happen before. Sure, she had heard about people having heart attacks, but she had never actually witnessed one. It was scary and sad and shocking all at the same time. The wedding coordinator, Mrs. Thompson, appeared out of nowhere with her phone pressed to her ear. Maya could hear her talking rapidly to the emergency services, giving them the address of the hotel and explaining what had happened. Her voice was shaky, and Maya could tell that she was trying hard not to panic. Within what felt like minutes but was probably longer, the sound of sirens filled the air outside the hotel. The paramedics came rushing into the ballroom with their equipment and took over from Dr. Peterson. Maya watched as they worked on Mr. Harrison, doing everything they could to help him. The whole scene felt like watching a movie, except this was real life, and it was happening right in front of her. The bride started crying, and Maya felt her heart break a little bit. This was supposed to be Isabella's perfect day, the day she had probably been planning since she was a little girl. Maya thought about how much money had been spent on this wedding, how many months of planning had gone into every detail, and how everything was now falling apart because of something nobody could have predicted. The paramedics were able to get Mr. Harrison stable enough to move him. Maya watched as they carefully lifted him onto a stretcher and wheeled him out of the ballroom. Dr. Peterson went with them, probably to make sure the hospital doctors knew exactly what had happened. After they left, the ballroom felt strange and empty, even though it was still full of people. The silence was awkward and heavy. Nobody seemed to know what to do or say. Some guests were whispering quietly to each other, others were checking their phones, and a few were starting to gather their things like they might leave early. Maya looked around at all the beautiful decorations that were still exactly the same as they had been 10 minutes ago. The flowers still smelled wonderful, the chandeliers still sparkled, and the tables still looked perfect. But somehow everything felt completely different now. The worst part was watching Isabella. She was trying so hard to hold herself together, but Maya could see the tears in her eyes. Her wedding day was supposed to be filled with joy and laughter and dancing, not ambulances and emergencies. Maya wanted to do something to help, but what could a waitress possibly do in a situation like this? Mrs. Thompson was frantically trying to figure out what to do next. Maya overheard her talking to someone on her phone about finding recorded music to play through the sound system. But then Maya remembered hearing earlier that the sound system had broken down that morning and the technicians hadn't been able to fix it completely. The mood in the room was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. Some of the older guests were starting to whisper about whether they should just go home. Others were trying to comfort Isabella and Robert, but Maya could tell that nothing anyone said was really helping. Isabella's father, a tall man in an expensive suit who had looked so proud during the ceremony, now looked completely helpless. Maya had served his table during dinner and noticed how he kept checking his watch and making sure everything was running on schedule. This was clearly a man who was used to being in control of situations, but there was nothing he could do to fix this. Maya realized she was still standing in the same spot where she had been when everything started. Her supervisor caught her eye and gestured for her to continue cleaning up the broken plates. As she knelt down to pick up the pieces, Maya couldn't stop thinking about how quickly everything had changed. Just 15 minutes ago, this had been the most beautiful, perfect wedding she had ever seen. Now it felt like watching a dream turn into something sad and uncertain. Maya wondered if the rest of the evening could be saved somehow, or if this lovely couple's wedding day was going to end with everyone going home early and feeling disappointed. Little did she know that in just a few minutes, she would be the one to turn everything around in a way that nobody could have ever imagined. Maya finished picking up the broken plates and stood up slowly, her eyes still fixed on the empty piano bench. The silence in the ballroom was becoming more uncomfortable with each passing minute. She could see Isabella standing near the head table, her beautiful wedding dress now seeming like a costume from a play that had suddenly stopped mid-scene. Mrs. Thompson was pacing back and forth near the entrance, her phone still pressed to her ear. Maya could hear bits and pieces of her frantic conversations as she tried to find a solution. First, she was calling other pianists in the city, but it was Saturday evening and most musicians were already booked for other events. Then she tried calling the hotel's tech support again about the broken sound system. But Maya could tell from her frustrated expression that they weren't giving her good news. The wedding guests were starting to look restless. Some of the elderly couples were whispering to each other and glancing toward the exit. A few younger guests had pulled out their phones and were probably texting their friends about the strange turn the evening had taken. The whole atmosphere that had been so magical just 20 minutes ago was slowly falling apart. Maya watched Isabella's father walk over to his daughter. She was close enough to hear him speaking in a low, gentle voice, probably trying to figure out what they should do next. Isabella kept shaking her head and dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, clearly trying not to let her makeup get ruined by tears. That's when something inside Maya started to stir. She couldn't explain exactly what it was, but seeing Isabella's distress was affecting her more than she expected. Maybe it was because Maya understood what it felt like when important things in your life didn't go according to plan. Or maybe it was because she knew how much effort and money had gone into making this night perfect. Maya found herself thinking about her grandmother, who had passed away 2 years ago. Grandma Rose had always told her that music was a gift that was meant to be shared, especially when people needed it most. She used to say that keeping music locked away when others were hurting was like having medicine but refusing to give it to someone who was sick. The memory made Maya's chest feel tight. Her grandmother had been the one who found that old keyboard at the garage sale when Maya was 7. She had been the one who sat with Maya every day after school, encouraging her to practice even when her fingers got tired. Grandma Rose had been so proud when Maya got accepted to music school with a full scholarship. Maya looked around the room again. The beautiful chandeliers were still sparkling, the flowers still looked perfect, and the elegant tables were still set for a celebration. All that was missing was the music that would bring the joy back to the evening. The music that would let Isabella and Robert have the first dance they had probably dreamed about for months, before she could talk herself out of it. Maya started walking toward Mrs. Thompson. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. What was she doing? She was just a waitress? These people had paid thousands of dollars for a professional musician. Not some girl who worked for a minimum wage and tips, but with each step, Maya thought about Isabella's tears and her grandmother's words about sharing the gift of music. When she reached Mrs. Thompson, who was still frantically trying to find a solution on her phone, Maya cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thompson," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thompson looked up from her phone with an expression that was part annoyance and part desperation. "What is it?" "I'm trying to handle a crisis here," Mrs. Thompson replied, but not unkindly. Maya could tell that the wedding coordinator was stressed beyond belief, and probably hadn't slept properly in days preparing for this event. Maya took a deep breath. "I might be able to help with the piano situation," she said quietly, so that the nearby guests couldn't overhear. Mrs. Thompson stared at her for a moment like she hadn't heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Mrs. Thompson asked, lowering her phone for the first time since the emergency had started. "I can play piano," Maya said a little louder this time. "I know it's not what you planned, and I understand if you don't think it's appropriate, but I thought maybe I could help until you find someone else." Mrs. Thompson looked Maya up and down, taking in her server's uniform and her young face. Maya could practically see the thoughts running through the coordinator's mind. This was a high-end wedding with very wealthy, very particular guests. Was she really going to let a hotel waitress play piano at one of the most expensive events of the year? "Do you have any experience performing?" Mrs. Thompson asked, though Maya could tell she was already considering the idea out of sheer desperation. "I studied piano for 15 years, Maya said honestly. "I was accepted to Berklee College of Music, but I had to give up my scholarship to help my family." Maya didn't mention that she hadn't performed for anyone except her mirror in over 3 years. She didn't mention that her last real performance had been her audition for music school, or that most nights she was too tired from work to even touch her grandmother's old keyboard that was gathering dust in her bedroom. Mrs. Thompson was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Maya could see her looking over at Isabella, who was now sitting in a chair with her head in her hands, while Robert rubbed her shoulders. The other guests were starting to check their watches and have those polite but awkward conversations that happen when nobody knows what's supposed to happen next. "I don't know," Mrs. Thompson said finally. "This is a very important event. These people paid a lot of money for everything to be perfect." Maya felt her courage starting to waver, but then she glanced over at Isabella again. The bride had looked up from her hands and was staring at the empty piano with such sadness that Maya felt her heart break a little more. "I understand if you don't want to risk it," Maya said softly. "But maybe it would be better than no music at all? I promise I'll stop if it's not working out." Mrs. Thompson followed Maya's gaze to where Isabella was sitting. After what felt like forever, she sighed deeply. "Let me talk to the bride's father," she said. "But I have to warn you, Mr. Whitmore is very particular about things. If he says no, that's the end of it." Maya nodded quickly. "I understand. Thank you for even considering it." As Mrs. Thompson walked away toward the head table, Maya realized what she had just done. She had volunteered to play piano in front of 200 wealthy strangers, people who were used to the finest things money could buy. What if she had forgotten how to play well? What if her fingers didn't remember the songs? What if she embarrassed herself and lost her job? But then Maya looked at the silent piano sitting in the corner of the ballroom, and she thought about her grandmother's voice telling her that music was meant to be shared. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to do something more important than serving champagne and clearing plates. Maya watched nervously as Mrs. Thompson approached the head table where Isabella's father was standing. Mr. Whitmore was a tall, imposing man who looked like he was used to making important decisions every day. Throughout the evening, Maya had noticed how he carried himself with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to having things done exactly the way he wanted them, from where she stood. Maya could see Mrs. Thompson speaking quietly to Mr. Whitmore, gesturing in her direction. She felt her stomach flip as she watched his expression change from confusion to what looked like disbelief. He glanced over at Maya as she quickly looked down at her hands, suddenly very aware of her plain black uniform and the fact that she probably looked like the last person in the world who should be performing at such an elegant event. The conversation seemed to go on forever. Maya could see Mr. Whitmore shaking his head several times, and her heart started to sink. Of course he would say no. What had she been thinking? These people had hired a world-class pianist from the symphony, and now she was suggesting that a waitress could somehow fill his shoes. But then Maya saw Mrs. Thompson pointing toward Isabella, who was still sitting in her chair looking absolutely heartbroken. Mr. Whitmore turned to look at his daughter, and Maya watched as his stern expression softened just a little bit. Any father who saw his little girl that sat on her wedding day would want to do something to help, even if it meant taking a chance on something unexpected, after what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. Mrs. Thompson started walking back toward Maya. Her face was hard to read, and Maya prepared herself for disappointment. At least she had tried, right? At least she had offered to help instead of just standing by and watching the beautiful evening fall apart. "Mr. Whitmore wants to speak with you," Mrs. Thompson said when she reached Maya. "He's not convinced this is a good idea, but he's willing to listen." Maya's mouth went dry. Speaking to wealthy, important people had never been part of her job description. Usually she just smiled politely, served their food, and tried to be invisible. Now she was going to have to convince one of the most successful businessmen in the city that a hotel waitress could save his daughter's wedding reception. "What should I say to him?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just be honest," Mrs. Thompson replied. "Tell him about your experience with piano. And Maya," she added, lowering her voice even more, "if you're not absolutely sure you can do this well, please don't offer. These people will remember this night forever, and we can't afford to make it worse than it already is." Maya nodded, understanding the weight of what Mrs. Thompson was saying. This wasn't just about playing a few songs. This was about Isabella's memories of the most important day of her life. This was about whether 200 guests would go home. talking about the magical evening they had experienced or the disaster they had witnessed. Taking a deep breath, Maya walked across the marble floor toward the head table. With each step, she became more aware of the conversations around her gradually, dying down as people noticed her approaching the bride's family. By the time she reached Mr. Whitmore, she felt like everyone in the ballroom was watching her. "You're the waitress who thinks she can play piano?" Mr. Whitmore asked. His voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't particularly warm either. Maya could tell. He was a man who preferred facts to feelings, someone who made decisions based on logic rather than hope. "Yes, sir," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know this isn't what you planned, and I understand if you'd prefer to wait for a professional musician. Mrs. Thompson tells me you studied music in college," Mr. Whitmore continued, looking at her carefully. "But studying and performing are very different things. These guests are used to a certain level of quality." Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "I understand, sir. I studied piano for 15 years before I had to stop. I was accepted to Berklee College of Music with a full scholarship." She paused, then added quietly, "I know I'm not what you paid for, but I thought maybe some music would be better than no music at all." Behind Mr. Whitmore, Maya could see Isabella looking up at them with red, puffy eyes. The sight of the bride's distress gave Maya a boost of courage she didn't know she had. "I don't want to make your daughter's day any worse than it already is," Maya continued. "But I also can't stand watching her be so sad when maybe, just maybe, I could help make things a little bit better." Mr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face like he was trying to decide whether she could be trusted with something important. Maya could practically hear her heart beating as she waited for his answer. "What kind of music do you play?" he asked finally. "Classical, jazz, contemporary," Maya answered honestly. "I can play most wedding songs that couples usually request. I know all the traditional pieces for first dances and dinner music." "And you're confident you can perform in front of this many people?" Mr. Whitmore pressed. "Because if you start playing and it doesn't go well, there's no way to undo that embarrassment." Maya thought about lying, about pretending she performed for crowds all the time. But something in Mr. Whitmore's direct gaze made her want to be completely honest. "I haven't performed for anyone in 3 years," she admitted. "I work 2 jobs now to help support my family, and I haven't had much time for piano." "But music doesn't just disappear from your fingers. It's like riding a bicycle. Once you really know how to do it, you remember." She could see some of the nearby guests starting to listen to their conversation, and Maya felt her face getting warm again, but she pressed on. "Your daughter deserves to have her first dance as a married couple," Maya said, looking directly at Mr. Whitmore. "She deserves to have music at her reception. Maybe it won't be exactly what you planned, but it will be played with all the love and respect I can give." Mr. Whitmore glanced over at Isabella again, then back at Maya. She could see him weighing the risks in his mind. What if this waitress was overconfident? What if she embarrassed his family in front of all their friends and business associates? But what if she was right, and some music really was better than no music at all? "If I let you try this," Mr. Whitmore said slowly, "and it doesn't work out, you stop immediately. No arguments, no second chances. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Maya replied quickly. "Absolutely." Mr. Whitmore looked at his daughter one more time, then back at Maya. "All right," he said finally. "You have one chance to prove that this crazy idea might actually work. Don't make me regret this decision." Maya felt a rush of relief and terror all at the same time. She had gotten permission to try, but now she actually had to do it. In a few minutes, she was going to walk over to that beautiful grand piano and either save the evening or make everything infinitely worse. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "I won't let Isabella down." As Maya turned to walk toward the piano, she realized that 200 pairs of eyes were now following her every move. The moment of truth was finally here. Maya's legs felt like jelly as she walked across the marble floor toward the grand piano. Every step seemed to echo through the ballroom, even though she was wearing soft-soled shoes that normally made no sound at all. The distance between the Head table and the piano corner felt like it stretched on forever, giving her way too much time to think about everything that could go wrong. She could feel every single person in the room watching her. The conversations that had been starting to pick up again after Mr. Whitmore's decision now died down completely. Maya had never been the center of attention like this before, and it was terrifying. Usually she worked so hard to blend into the background, to be helpful but invisible. Now she was about to become the most visible person in the entire ballroom. As she got closer to the piano, Maya's mind started racing with doubts. What if her fingers had forgotten how to find the right keys? What if 3 years of not practicing had ruined her technique? What if she sat down and completely blanked out on every song she had ever learned? The thought made her stomach twist. Into knots. She reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, just staring at the instrument. It was absolutely beautiful, a glossy black grand piano that probably cost more than Maya's family made in several years. The keys looked perfect and untouched, like they were waiting for someone worthy to bring them to life. Maya wondered if she was that someone, or if she was about to embarrass herself in front of everyone. Behind her, she could hear the soft murmur of voices as guests whispered to each other about what was happening. Some of them were probably wondering who this waitress thought she was, trying to replace a professional musician. Others might be curious to see if she could actually pull it off. Maya tried not to think about what they were saying and focused. On the piano in front of her, she sat down on the bench and immediately felt how different it was from her grandmother's old keyboard at home. This bench was the perfect height, with cushioning that made it comfortable to sit on. The piano itself seemed to radiate quality, from the smooth finish to the way the keys were perfectly aligned. Even before she touched a single key, Maya could tell this instrument was capable of producing the most incredible sounds. Maya placed her hands gently on the keys without pressing down yet. The ivory felt cool and smooth under her fingertips. For just a moment, she closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to play with confidence. Back when music was the most important thing in her world. She thought about all those afternoons with her grandmother, practicing scales and learning new pieces until her fingers moved automatically to the right places. When she opened her eyes, Maya caught sight of Isabella sitting at the head table. The bride was watching her with an expression that was part hope and part desperation. Maya realized that this moment wasn't really about her at all. It was about giving Isabella the beautiful wedding reception she deserved. That thought helped calm her nerves just a little bit. Maya decided to start with something she knew by heart, something she had played so many times that her fingers could find the notes even if she was half asleep. She chose Pachelbel's Canon in D, one of the most popular wedding songs ever written. It was a piece she had learned when she was 12 years old, and she had played it at least 100 times over the years. She pressed down on the first few notes very softly, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. The sound that came from the piano was so pure and beautiful that it surprised her. This instrument was incredibly responsive. Even the gentlest touch produced rich, clear tones that seemed to fill the entire room effortlessly. Feeling slightly more confident, Maya began to play the opening melody a little louder, the familiar notes started flowing from her fingers like they had been waiting patiently for 3 years to be set free. She had been worried that she might have lost her touch, but the muscle memory was still there, buried underneath all those months of serving tables and washing dishes. As the melody developed, Maya felt something magical starting to happen. The tension in her shoulders began to melt away as her fingers remembered exactly where they belonged. The music started to take over, pushing away her fears and doubts, and replacing them with the pure joy she had always felt when playing piano. The sound of the beautiful melody began to fill the ballroom, and Maya noticed that the room was getting quieter. The whispered conversations were stopping as people began to listen to what she was playing. But this time, instead of feeling nervous about the attention, Maya felt like she was sharing something precious with everyone in the room. She could hear how perfectly tuned the piano was, how each note rang out clear and true. The acoustics in the ballroom were incredible too. The high ceiling and marble floors created a natural resonance that made even simple melodies sound grand and impressive. Maya had never played on an instrument this fine or in a room with such perfect sound quality. As she moved into the more complex parts of the piece, Maya's confidence grew stronger. Her fingers were moving faster now, dancing across the keys with increasing precision and grace. The 3 years of not playing seemed to disappear as if they had never happened. This was who she really was, underneath the uniform and the tired smile and the worry about paying bills. She was a musician. The music began to soar, and Maya felt like she was flying. Every note was exactly where it was supposed to be. Every phrase flowed perfectly into the next one. She could feel the emotion of the piece coming through her playing. The joy and celebration and hope that made it such a perfect choice for weddings. Around the ballroom, something incredible was starting to happen. The guests who had been looking uncertain and uncomfortable just minutes before were now completely focused on the music. Some of them had surprised expressions on their faces, like they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. Others were beginning to smile as the beautiful melody worked its magic on the atmosphere of the room. Maya glanced up briefly and saw Isabella's face. The bride's expression had completely transformed. The sadness and disappointment were gone, replaced by wonder and growing joy. She was looking at Maya like she couldn't believe that this was the same person who had been quietly serving dinner. Just an hour ago, Robert, the groom, had his arm around Isabella's shoulders, and both of them were watching Maya with amazement. Other guests were starting to turn their chairs toward the piano so they could see better. The whole energy of the room was shifting from awkward disappointment to something that felt like magic. As Maya played the final notes of the opening piece, she realized that something incredible had just happened. She hadn't just played a song. She had reminded everyone in the room why they were there. They were there to celebrate love and joy and new beginnings. The music had brought back the feeling of celebration that the emergency had stolen away when the last note faded into silence. Maya held her breath and waited to see what would happen next. The silence that followed the last note of Canon in D lasted only a few seconds, but to Maya it felt like an eternity. She sat perfectly still at the piano bench, her hands hovering just above the keys, waiting to see how the room would react. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, but she tried to keep her expression calm and composed. Then it started. First, one person began to clap, then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. That was so enthusiastic it took Maya completely by surprise. She had expected polite clapping at best, maybe even silence if people weren't impressed. But this was genuine appreciation, the kind of applause that comes from people who have just experienced something they didn't expect. Maya looked up from the piano keys and saw faces that had completely transformed from just minutes before. The same guests who had been whispering skeptically about the waitress, who thought she could play piano, were now clapping with real enthusiasm. Some of them were nodding at each other with expressions that seemed to say, "Did you hear that? That was actually incredible." Isabella was beaming now, her earlier tears replaced by a smile so bright it could have lit up the entire room. She was clapping harder than anyone, and Maya could see her saying something to Robert that looked like, "Can you believe this?" Robert was grinning too, clearly amazed by what had just happened at his wedding reception. Mr. Whitmore, who had been so skeptical about letting a hotel employee perform at his daughter's expensive wedding, was clapping with a look of genuine surprise on his face. Maya caught his eye across the room, and he gave her a small nod that seemed to say, "Well done, you proved me wrong." But the most wonderful thing Maya noticed was how the entire atmosphere of the ballroom had changed. The awkward tension that had filled the room after Mr. Harrison's collapse was completely gone. People were talking to each other again, but now they were excited rather than uncomfortable. The celebration feeling was coming back, and Maya realized that music really did have the power to transform everything. Mrs. Thompson appeared beside the piano, still looking a bit shocked by what she had just witnessed. "That was beautiful," she said quietly to Maya. "I had no idea you could play like that. Would you be able to continue? Maybe play some dinner music while people finish their meals?" Maya felt a surge of confidence that she hadn't experienced in years. "Yes, absolutely," she replied. I can play as long as you need me to. What about the first dance? Mrs. Thompson asked, glancing over at Isabella and Robert. Do you know any romantic songs they could dance to? Maya's mind immediately went through her mental catalog of love songs and wedding favorites. I know dozens of them, she said. Whatever they'd like to hear, I can probably play it. Mrs. Thompson hurried over to speak with the bride and groom, while Maya prepared for her next song. She decided to continue with gentle, classical pieces that would create a perfect background for conversation and dinner. She started with a soft arrangement of Air on the G string by Bach, letting the graceful melody float through the room like a gentle breeze. As she played, Maya noticed that people were starting to relax completely. Conversations resumed at the dinner tables, but they were animated and happy rather than awkward. Servers, including some of Maya's co-workers, began moving around the room again, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates. The whole reception was getting back on track, and Maya felt proud that she was helping to make that happen. She transitioned smoothly from Bach to a gentle jazz arrangement of The Way You Look Tonight, one of her grandmother's favorite songs. Maya had learned it years ago specifically because Grandma Rose used to hum it while cooking dinner. Playing it now made Maya feel like her grandmother was somehow present in the room, smiling down at her granddaughter who was finally sharing her musical gift with the world again, a few tables away. Maya noticed an elderly woman wiping tears from her eyes as she listened to the music. The woman reminded Maya of her grandmother, and she wondered if the song was bringing back beautiful memories for her too. Music had this amazing ability to connect people across time and space, to make them remember the people they loved and the moments that mattered most. Maya moved on to play Clair de Lune by Debussy, a piece that had always been one of her favorites because of its dreamy, floating quality. The complex but delicate melody required her full attention, and she found herself getting lost in the music in the best possible way. Her fingers seemed to know exactly where to go without her having to think about it, and the beautiful sounds flowing from the piano made her feel alive in a way she had forgotten was possible around the room. Maya could see that people were not just tolerating her playing, they were genuinely enjoying it. Several guests had turned their chairs slightly toward the piano so they could listen better. Others were swaying gently to the rhythm, and a few couples were holding hands across their dinner tables, caught up in the romantic atmosphere the music was creating. Mrs. Thompson came back over to the piano during a brief pause between songs. Isabella and Robert want to know if you could play At Last for their first dance, she said. It's their special song. Maya's face lit up. At Last by Etta James was one of her absolute favorite songs to play, with its gorgeous melody and rich, emotional lyrics. I'd love to play that for them, she said. It's a beautiful choice. They want to do their first dance in about 10 minutes after everyone finishes the main course, Mrs. Thompson explained. Will that work for you? Perfect, Maya replied. I'll keep playing background music until then. As Mrs. Thompson walked away, Maya started a soft version of Fly Me to the Moon, another jazz standard that always made people smile. She was amazed at how natural this felt, how right it seemed to be sharing her music with a room full of people who were celebrating one of the most important days of their lives. Looking around the ballroom, Maya realized that something incredible was happening. These wealthy, sophisticated guests who lived in a completely different world from hers were connecting with her music in a real and meaningful way. The barriers between the server and the served had disappeared, replaced by the universal language of beautiful melodies and heartfelt emotion. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The piano felt like home under her fingers, and sharing music with others felt like breathing, natural, necessary, and absolutely right. As she prepared to play the song that would let Isabella and Robert have their first dance as husband and wife, Maya couldn't help but smile. This evening had started as one of the worst nights of the bride's life, but it was turning into something magical that none of them would ever forget. 10 minutes passed quickly as Maya continued playing soft background music. She had moved through several jazz standards and was just finishing a gentle version of Moon River, when she saw Mrs. Thompson approaching with Isabella and Robert. The bride's face was glowing with happiness now, a complete transformation from the heartbroken expression she had worn earlier in the evening. "We're ready for our first dance," Isabella said, her voice filled with excitement. Up close, Maya could see that Isabella's eyes were sparkling with joy rather than tears. "Thank you so much for doing this. You've saved our entire wedding." "It's my pleasure," Maya replied, meaning every word. "At Last is such a beautiful song. I hope you'll love dancing to it." Robert stepped forward and shook Maya's hand warmly. "Seriously, we can't thank you enough. When everything went wrong earlier, we thought our reception was ruined. But this has turned out even better than we originally planned." Maya felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "You're very kind, but I'm just happy I could help make your special day perfect." Mrs. Thompson gestured to the center of the ballroom, where the other guests were already starting to gather around an open space that had been cleared for dancing. "Whenever you're ready to start the song, just begin playing. Isabella and Robert will come out to the dance floor." Maya positioned her fingers over the keys and took a deep breath. At Last was a song that required both technical skill and emotional depth. It started slowly and tenderly, then built to powerful, soaring moments that could give anyone chills if played correctly. Maya had always loved performing this piece, because it told such a beautiful story of finding true love after waiting and searching for so long. She began with the gentle, opening notes that introduced the melody. The song started softly, like a whisper of hope, and Maya played with all the tenderness and romance she could pour into each note. The piano responded beautifully, producing rich, warm tones that seemed to embrace everyone in the room. As the familiar melody filled the ballroom, Isabella and Robert walked hand in hand to the center of the dance floor. Isabella's wedding dress rustled softly as she moved, and the layers of fabric seemed to float around her like she was dancing on air even before the dancing began. Robert looked at his new wife with such love and adoration that Maya felt her heart skip a beat. The couple began to dance, and Maya watched them as she played, timing her music to match their movements perfectly. They moved together like they had been dancing their whole lives, completely lost in each other and the moment they were sharing. Isabella rested her head on Robert's shoulder, and he held her close as they swayed to the music around the dance floor. The wedding guests had formed a circle, watching the newlyweds with smiles and emotional expressions. Maya could see several people wiping away happy tears as they witnessed this perfect moment of love and celebration. The entire scene looked like something from a fairy tale, with the crystal chandeliers casting warm light over the dancing couple, and the beautiful music filling every corner of the room. As Maya played the more complex middle section of the song, her confidence soared to new heights. Every note was exactly where it should be, every phrase flowed seamlessly into the next. She found herself adding small flourishes and personal touches to the arrangement, making the song uniquely hers while still honoring the classic melody that everyone loved. Other couples began joining Isabella and Robert on the dance floor. First, Isabella's parents stepped out to dance, then Robert's parents, followed by the wedding party and other family members. Soon the dance floor was filled with couples of all ages, all moving to the music Maya was creating. Maya noticed that even some of the hotel staff had gathered near the doorways to listen. Her supervisor was there, along with several of the other servers she worked with every day. They were looking at her with expressions of amazement, like they were seeing her for the first time. Maya realized that her coworkers had no idea she could play piano, just like the wedding guests had no idea when the evening began. As the song reached its emotional climax, Maya put everything she had into the performance. She thought about Isabella and Robert's love story, about all the couples on the dance floor who had found their perfect person, about her grandmother who had always believed that music was the most beautiful way to express what words couldn't say. The piano seemed to respond to her emotions, producing sounds that were richer and more powerful than anything Maya had played earlier in the evening. The final notes of At Last echoed through the ballroom, and for a moment everyone seemed frozen in place, as if they didn't want the magic to end. Then the applause started, and this time it was even more enthusiastic than before. The guests weren't just clapping politely anymore, they were cheering and whistling like they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Isabella and Robert walked over to the piano, still holding hands and beaming with happiness. "That was absolutely perfect," Isabella said, her voice filled with emotion. "I've never heard that song played so beautifully. You made our first dance everything we dreamed it would be." But the evening wasn't over yet. Other guests started approaching the piano, making requests for their favorite songs. An elderly gentleman asked if Maya knew "The Way You Look Tonight" for a dance with his wife of 50 years. A young couple requested "Can't Help Myself" for a fun, upbeat dance. A group of college friends wanted to hear "Sweet Carolyn" so they could sing along. Maya found herself saying yes to every request, her confidence growing with each new song. She played jazz standards, pop hits, classical pieces, and even some songs she had to improvise arrangements for on the spot. With every song, the energy in the room grew more joyful and celebratory. The dance floor stayed packed all evening, with guests taking turns dancing to different styles of music. Maya watched elderly couples dancing to songs from their youth, young people showing off modern moves to contemporary hits, and children spinning around to whatever rhythm caught their fancy. What amazed Maya most was how the entire social atmosphere had changed. Earlier in the evening, she had been invisible to these wealthy guests. Now they were treating her like the star of the show, coming over between songs to compliment her playing and share stories about what the music meant to them. A woman in an elegant silver dress told Maya that Moon River had been her late husband's favorite song, and hearing it played so beautifully had brought back wonderful memories of their honeymoon. A businessman in an expensive suit mentioned that he hadn't danced in years, but Maya's music had inspired him to ask his wife to dance for the first time since their own wedding. As the evening continued, Maya realized that something extraordinary was happening. She wasn't just playing background music for a fancy wedding anymore. She was creating moments of pure joy and connection for everyone in the room, using the gift her grandmother had helped her discover all those years ago. As the evening wound down and the last few couples swayed to a gentle version of Unchained Melody, Maya felt like she was living in a beautiful dream. Her fingers were tired but happy, and her heart was fuller than it had been in years. When she played the final chord and lifted her hands from the keys, the entire ballroom erupted in the most thunderous applause she had ever heard. Every single person in the room was on their feet, clapping and cheering like they had just witnessed the performance of a lifetime. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, with guests whistling and calling out "Bravo!" and "Encore!" Maya felt tears of joy forming in her eyes as she looked around at all the smiling faces surrounding her. Isabella rushed over to the piano. First, still in her beautiful wedding dress, but no longer worried about keeping it perfect. She threw her arms around Maya in a hug that was so warm and genuine it made Maya's heart overflow with happiness. "You didn't just save our wedding," Isabella said through her own happy tears. "You made it more magical than anything we could have ever planned. I'll remember this night for the rest of my life, and it's because of you." Robert joined them, shaking Maya's hand enthusiastically before pulling both women into a group hug. "Seriously, Maya, you're incredible. We hired a professional pianist, but what you did tonight was so much more special because it came from your heart." Mr. Whitmore approached the piano, and Maya felt a moment of nervousness return. But when she looked at his face, she saw only admiration and respect. "Young lady," he said in his serious but warm voice, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to doubt you, and I'm grateful you proved me wrong so beautifully." The guests continued to crowd around the piano, each wanting to personally thank Maya for the incredible evening she had given them. Stories poured out from people who wanted to share what the music had meant to them. An elderly woman told Maya that hearing "The Way You Look Tonight" had made her feel like she was dancing with her late husband again. A young father said his daughter's face had lit up when Maya played "A Whole New World" and she started singing along. Mrs. Thompson appeared at Maya's side, looking completely amazed by everything that had happened. "Maya, I've been coordinating weddings for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The guests are already asking if you're available for their own events. As if to prove Mrs. Thompson's point, several guests approached Maya with business cards and requests for her contact information. A woman who owned an art gallery wanted to book Maya for her next opening. A man who ran a successful restaurant asked if she would consider playing weekend dinners. Another guest mentioned that his company was planning a charity gala and would love to have Maya perform. "I don't even have business cards," Maya said, feeling overwhelmed by all the sudden interest in her musical abilities. "I never thought of myself as a professional performer anymore." "Well, you better start thinking of yourself that way," said a distinguished woman in an elegant navy dress. She introduced herself as Mrs. Richardson, and Maya learned that she was a prominent music teacher in the city. "What you did tonight showed not just technical skill but real artistry. Have you ever considered returning to your musical studies?" Maya felt her heart skip a beat. "I had to give up my scholarship to music school 3 years ago when my mom got sick. I've been working to help support my family ever since." Mrs. Richardson's expression grew soft with understanding. "Life sometimes forces us to set aside our dreams temporarily, but that doesn't mean those dreams have to die forever. Would you be interested in discussing some opportunities that might help you get back to your music while still supporting your family?" Before Maya could answer, Mr. Whitmore stepped forward again. "Mrs. Richardson, I'd like to be part of that conversation if you don't mind. What I witnessed tonight was extraordinary, and I believe in investing in extraordinary talent." Maya looked back and forth between these two successful, influential people who were talking about helping her return to the world of music. Just hours ago, she had been invisible to people like this. Now they were offering to help change her entire life. "I don't know what to say," Maya admitted, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life was taking. "This morning I woke up thinking I'd be serving dinner and clearing plates. I never imagined anything like this could happen." Isabella took Maya's hands in hers. "Say yes," she encouraged. "You have a gift that deserves to be shared with the world." Tonight proved that beyond any doubt. As the conversation continued around her, Maya thought about her grandmother and the old keyboard that had started everything. She thought about her mom at home, probably watching late-night television and waiting for Maya to come home with stories about the fancy wedding. She thought about her little brother who was studying hard in college, working toward his own dreams. Most of all, she thought about how it felt to play piano again, to share music with people who needed it, to be the person she was always meant to be. The joy and fulfillment she had experienced tonight reminded her of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Over the next few weeks, everything in Maya's life began to change in the most wonderful ways. Videos that guests had recorded of her performance started showing up on social media, spreading far beyond the wedding reception. People were sharing the clips with captions like, "You won't believe what happened at this wedding," and "This waitress has an incredible secret talent." The videos went viral, reaching millions of people around the world who were moved by the story of the hardworking young woman who had saved a wedding with her hidden musical gift. Comments poured in from viewers who were inspired by Maya's kindness and amazed by her talent. Mr. Whitmore kept his word about believing in extraordinary talent. He connected Maya with a music scholarship program that would allow her to complete her degree while working part-time, ensuring she could still help support her family. Mrs. Richardson became Maya's mentor, helping her prepare for auditions and connecting her with performance opportunities throughout the city. Within 6 months, Maya had released her first album of piano arrangements, featuring many of the songs she had played at the wedding that changed everything. The album became a bestseller, with all proceeds helping Maya establish a scholarship fund for young musicians who, like her, had to choose between their dreams and their family responsibilities. Maya never forgot the lesson she learned that magical night at the Grand Manor Hotel. Sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as ordinary moments. Sometimes helping others leads to helping yourself in ways you never imagined possible. And sometimes, when you share your gifts with the world responds by giving you chances you never dared to dream about. Most importantly, Maya learned that music really was meant to be shared, just like her grandmother had always told her. The joy she brought to Isabella and Robert's wedding reception was nothing compared to the joy that came back to her when she decided to trust in her talents and embrace the opportunities that followed. Years later, whenever Maya performed at concerts around the world, she would always dedicate at least one song to the memory of her grandmother and to the bride and groom, who gave her the chance to discover that dreams postponed are not always dreams denied.